Well, it's that time of the week again, 6 p.m. on Sunday. Steve's place. Anyway, um, glad everyone's showing up tonight. And this is our last show before the conference. And I'd like to encourage everyone to come to our conference next week. Uh, it'll be August 10th to 14th. I'll be arriving in Albuquerque on Saturday, the 6th. So this is our last show for the until September. Um, we may have live features from time to time during the conference, and I'll be sending out an email letting people know about that. And so I encourage you all to come. I mean, it's going to be a pretty good conference. It's shaping up to be. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Um, it's at a 4-star hotel, a premium price. I mean, $82 a night it starts at with a free what do you call that? A buffet included. You can't beat that with a stick. Because normally these rooms will run at 150 plus for the AAA discount. They don't have a free breakfast either for them. And then you turn around and you can. You can stay at Hotel 6 and you're still paying more. But anyway, enough of that. I'd like to encourage everyone to become a member at the YouTube channel. Be sure you subscribe. That helps us out. But even more important, get an exclusive membership. Our exclusive membership entitles the people to see all of the videos right away. We have 1,000. We'll be putting another 500 or more before Christmas. So they get back, we'll be putting more up there, and then we'll be doing some other things too. Up there. But anyway, check out the Tesla YouTube channel. As you can see, it's the channel of choice for aliens. Anyway, our guest tonight is Paul Price, and he spoke at our conference last year. And without further ado, I'm going to bring him on. There you are, Paul. And tell people about yourself, Paul.
Well, I'm a writer, author, grandfather, father, podcast host, and a research scientist dealing in the with the subject of gravity in regards to counter-gravitational repulsion. I've been doing this particular thing for over 30 years now. It all started with a dream I had about generating a plasma pulse propulsion, literal dream, back when I was in my early 20s. And in that, it kind of led me on a path of research that dealt with advanced physics, dealing with the control of gravity, and it's led into other side projects that I've been working on now. And pretty much that's just about it. I'm 54 years old. I live currently in Montana, and that's about it for the intro. I mean, if they have any other questions after we get done with the presentation tonight, I don't mind answering any questions that they may have in the chat.
Okay, well, without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to you, Paul, and you can just jump right into your presentation. Okay.
Thank you. Well, for any of you who were at the Tesla Tech conference last year, I actually did a presentation called Gravitational Propulsion in a Fluid Membrane, a new propulsion methodology. It was a redo of a presentation I did for the Space Technology Applications International Forum 2 Conference, or STAFE 2, in 2012. The whole thing is that it's the follow-on to a paper that I wrote in 2005 for the original STAFE, called Gravity as a Mass Unit Using Frequency modulation to control gravity, the papers are otherwise known online as vortex gravity control. The issue is developing technologies that not only can warp a gravitational field, but the paper also tries to interpret and to explain what gravity really is. As Einstein tried to put it in his writings, gravity is not a force, but it is an effect. And he said, because of the curvature of space-time. Where I differ from that is that, yes, it is an effect, but it's not necessarily curving space-time. We're not curving the vacuum itself. What we're generating or dealing with right now is two opposing pieces of matter, one being a plasmoid type matter or proto matter, or how the elders, I'll put it this way, elder scientists from back in the past called ether, and how ether, once ignited, formed the basis of matter that we currently know today. Remnants of that ether is still out there in the universe and permeates the universe. It generates a dance, so to speak, between the two forms of matter. That particular dance generates equilibrium between the two. And it's that equilibrium, along with the spin function, that generates the effect that we call gravity. Okay, and let me try to read this here. And as I stated before, gravity was assumed to be a wave interaction with solid matter in the space-time continuum. As many of you know, that one of the points that has been used in the past to disprove ether was the Michelson-Morley experiment, where they assumed that ether was stationary. The assumption was wrong. It's ever flowing and ever moving. Therefore, using a interferometer and trying to generate a way where you could impede the pulse of light and the timing in which the pulse of light would be able to be tracked and cataloged is not necessarily correct when you're dealing with matter that flows or an ether that flows. In other words, there was an assumption that there was no ether or that ether drift wasn't detected. And in the paper, I gave an alternative hypothesis as to redefine gravity as an interaction between plasma membranes that represent gravity. And also tried to explain how gravity can be manipulated through electromechanical means. And let me explain that. We're generating a rotating torus that's generating a rotating field that then interacts with the ether, generating a warping effect. And that not only will count, an electromechanical effect means that not only will counter gravity by folding the membrane, but that this process will, with the right conditions, because we're generating null space within that field that we're generating, may lead to faster than light travel. The assumption that either wasn't stationary but flowed, thereby creating the conditions to show variations in the travel time that light took place, was tested in a repeated experiment, and it was shown that there were variations within the light pulse. In other words, the assumption that ether was not a stationary form of matter, but actually did have motion and you incorporated the motion with the repeated experiments that Michelson did later on, showed that there was a impedance and it was detectable. Why is that important? Because there was a mass interfering with the light that was being measured. As the experiments showed, there was a variation in the time that it took the speed of light to reach all the objects in the interferometer, as I was explaining. And we all know who this beautiful man is, or was, Nikola Tesla. And Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity and the membrane, a structural membrane energy field is a thin membrane of energy. Now remember, it's malleable and pliable. That means it can be warped and bent. The field has a fluidic structure, which means that it's not stationary, it floats. It is a theoretical construct, or more as a conjecture, which has been proven, unlike what I wrote in this original presentation. There have been some proofs being made that where they have shown that ether drift has been detected. So I'm going to pass that and then go into the membrane permeates the known universe. Now, let me bring up a fact, too, that when they were doing the wide field gamma ray observations, what we're seeing right there is not only can be interpreted as the remnants of the Big Bang, but what we're seeing in my estimation from the observations I've made is a map of the etheric field. I want you to think about that right now. That field, or that proto matter, permeates the known universe. And there are different densities within that matter itself. Certain parts of that wide field gamma ray observations that were done in the 90s until the early 2000s by not only American satellites but others, show even dark areas of what they call cold regions of space. The plasmoid matter that we're looking at is cold plasma. It is not a hot detectable plasma. Therefore, if you see anything on a gamma ray observation that shows a very cold and dark area, you can bet money that that is a large protomatter or etheric space. Okay, now that I've gone through that explanation, the fabric can be defined, the fabric as we know of space-time, or let's just erase space-time right now. But the fabric defined inside the known universe as we know it today can be defined as a fluidic motion membrane or an ether-like membrane that permeates the known universe as in a modern ether theory. And let me pause here to also reflect on one aspect. Albert Einstein, near the end of his life, was trying to come up with the unified field theory. And he was having a very difficult time bringing in the strong and weak nuclear forces with gravity and electromagnetism, using strictly a relativistic point of view. Near the end of his life, he had to admit that the only possible way that you could even consider unifying the fields was through what he called a quantum ether. Think about that in relation to what I'm telling you right now. And back to the presentation right now. A fluid membrane includes a plasma which interacts with solid matter. And using the field tensor dealing with geometric constants that Einstein developed, the membrane works as a fabric that interacts with matter, and the effect is gravitation. Now, Tesla was working on a theory before his death that used ether as a basic model to explain the interactions that generated gravity. He was in direct conflict with Einstein's theory of relativity. In fact, he had been friends with Einstein and basically told his friend that it was nothing more than gobbledygook. It was nonsense, and we're talking relativity. The thing that I want to bring up to the audience tonight is that anything that can be explained through the theory of relativity can also be explained with an etheric model. Gravitational lensing being one prime example of that. And there are ways of detecting it because there would be variations within the electromagnetic field that would come off as noise, but could very well explain that there was an ether interaction that was being detected through the electromagnetic spectrum, whether it be by variations in the light signal or in radio frequency. But now that I've ran and explained that, what Tesla's dynamic theory of gravity, what he tried to convey, even though he never wrote it down, what the man tried to convey was that you have a form of energy or plasmoid matter that's interacting with solid matter. And I hope your people can see this. An envelope around solid matter, and as it's twisting and turning, it is trying to to be a force of equilibrium, to equalize the spin plus the gradient factor of the matter that's interacting. That generates gravity as we know it. It doesn't matter how small the piece of matter is compared to how large the matter is. And a consequence of the interaction will still be the same, but not in as much of an effect as we see with larger bodies in the solar system. And even black holes can be put into this. I have my ideas about black holes, but I don't think that we have enough time during this presentation for me to explain that. But it's a countersink actually that allows a universe structure to keep from flying apart due to rotational effects. It's a counterbalance, but I can explain that at a later time. What Tesla was trying to show is that with the ether model, you can explain and unify all the fields as were once known, and would in effect have explained the model, or had been the model to explain Einstein's unified field theory. Because we're not looking at fields per se, we're looking at additional effects of interactions between states of matter, generating byproduct effects of gravity, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and electromagneticity. And this is what, in effect, Tesla was alluding to in the statements he made about his dynamic theory of gravity and ether. Now, the fluid membrane, in effect, permeates the known universe. We already talked about that earlier. And it does imply the assumption that ether is neither flat nor motionless, but moves. I want you guys to think about this in one aspect. Have you ever been to a stream? And let me explain why I bring this up. We had one hellacious flood recently here in Montana where I'm at. It was a 100-year flood. It turned streams into roaring, rushing rivers. Water destroyed everything in its path. And in the area where I'm at, we're now finally getting back on our feet again, thank goodness. But the whole idea, when you're generating a field, you got to think of ether as like a flowing body of water. And think of us as being a pebble with that flowing body of water flowing around us, allowing us to push, and we have a countersink called the sun, which is keeping us in a constant rate of rotation. We're still interacting with that ether, but it's being interacted and counterbalanced by the mass of our own home star. With that, what we're looking at with the fluid membrane is that it still interacts with matter as we know it and causes effects that we see that are explainable. We don't have a direct definition of what gravity is. Even under Einstein's theory of relativity, you can't, it's an assumption. It is not a provable hypothesis completely. We know the effects there. We know that the effect interacts between states of matter. But what is gravity? Gravity is that effect between interactions between matter and ether, or the what I call proto matter. And the exchange of momentum between the solid mass and the membrane acts like a energy field that generates a state of equilibrium, generating gravity. And this was stated in a paper done by Consoli and Pappalardo that showed that gravity is a long wave acoustic phenomenon in a superfluid medium. And let's go to Hal Puthoff. Now, if any of your listeners here know about Operation Stargate and remote viewing, Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ were two of the chief scientists on the original remote viewing program. But Hal Puthoff himself is a noted theoretical physicist. And he had dealt with work done by Andrei Sakharov, dealing with the zero-point fluctuation. And Puthoff found that gravity is a zero-point fluctuation force, where he points out that Sakharov, or that Andrei Sakharov, regarded gravitation not as a fundamental interaction, but an induced effect brought about by changes in the vacuum when matter was present. And observations and experiments done by Eugene Poklenov, John Searle, Roshan and Godin, and Paul Murad's replication of the Godin device has shown that gravity can be, or might be, overcome, I should say, or can be. I'll use that. And if some of the claims are true, then these inventors may have produced a significant loss of weight due to possibly asymmetric forces that counteract against the weight using high voltages. In other words, the higher voltages plus rotation people rotating the field generates a flux effect, which causes the effect of gravity to warp. Okay, and as a particle flows to the point of least resistance, from positive to negative, the momentum is increased, thereby allowing the linear transfer of that energy momentum into the membrane to generate a flux condition within disturbances. So in other words, as I was stating before, Gravity or the interaction always wants to maintain equilibrium. How to counter that is to generate counter or non-equilibrium, or best way to put it, generate a chaos effect, which causes it to have to force against the impeding rotational force, and it causes it to bend and warp, generating lift. And also, ether, in my theory, isn't a field of charge that permeates matter, as some have contended. It is more of a standalone state of energetic particles bound by an electromechanical force that binds with the larger bodies in the universe. Ether could be the very substance that generates matter, including planets. And I want to tell you that there are some correlations, though, I would say, between what we would call the Big Bang, which I call the Big Pop, multiple Big Pops, that generated atomic interactions, which generated coalescing of this plasmoid matter into the final resulting product, which turns out to be mass or matter, including the Earth, asteroids, suns, galaxies, so on and so forth. With this, a system can be engineered using the electromagnetic field processes to generate resistance by using spin in the field that can generate a fold in the field. A system can possibly be engineered by using an electromagnetic field to generate resistance. And I'll explain that in just a bit after I read this. By spinning the energy field that can fold the field and counteract a gravitational effect. Since it is hypothesized that gravity is a field interaction between different states of matter, plasma and solid, and a vacuum, the manipulation of the field therefore can trigger a counter-gravitational effect. Now we're going to talk about Gabriel Kron later on and what he, in his hypothesis, and also in what he did, the generating field equations that would show that spinning electromagnetic systems generate warpages in space-time. Now, I'm not going to get into that too much right now. That's for later on in the presentation. But this has a lot to do with the statement that was just made. So if any of you are having any issues with what I'm saying, look up the information yourselves, do your homework, either prove me right or prove me wrong. Either way, know and learn. And that's one thing I want to tell everybody. Don't just listen to what people tell you. Don't listen to what I'm telling you either. Do your homework. And if you don't understand it, I've been doing this for over 30 years now. I had to learn a lot of this on my own. And I had a lot of good help from, I would call the Zen masters of physics, who helped kind of guide me down, when I was deviating from one part, they would guide me down the proper path. But what I'm saying is, listen and learn, and hopefully you can take something from this. So, but back to the presentation. This highly charged field can be generated by rotational magnetic fields if the rotation is high enough to produce low yield frequencies, such as multiple variants between 10 gigahertz to about 140 gigahertz. As the ether is in a state of flux, then it isn't in a state of equilibrium. The membrane is assumed electromagnetic in nature, meaning that it's made up of energetic particles that form a structure akin to a fabric. By pulsing a magnetic burst, timed pulses that release energy into the membrane, it causes a disruption as an imbalance within the membrane, generating the warping, as I explained earlier. The system generates a polarized field with electromagnetic properties by binding the membrane using magnetic spin. The system generates a polarized field with electromagnetic properties by binding the membrane using magnetic spin. This allows for random fluctuations in the vacuum field or vacuum energy. The electromagnetic field that the system generates is both negative and positive. And back to special relativity, an extension of general relativity says that the original theories that Einstein proposed, that space itself is physical. Special relativity can be interpreted that it says that there is an ether that drives the forces in the universe. This property allows for a warp drive concept to work, since space is not an empty vacuum, but there are physical properties dealing with energetic particles that are all aligned uniformly that can be simultaneously created and destroyed. When looking at the concept of a membrane, one must look at designing systems that take advantage of the membrane's ability to fold and then spring back into its original configuration. Doing this allows the system to manipulate gravitational fields. Since the field effect is generated by the ether itself. In Paul Murad's paper, Ramification of Einstein's Field Equations for Creating Advanced Propulsion Systems, over unity systems work within the boundaries of Einstein's field equations. Now, for many of you who may not know who the late Paul Murad is, let me try to tell you. He was a electrical engineer and a aerospace engineer that worked for NASA during the Apollo program and all the way up until the mid-90s before transferring to the Defense Intelligence Agency as an analyst. Paul Murad was a capable man. He just recently passed away from a brain tumor, and he was a personal friend of mine. But he wrote very succinctly about how Einstein's field equations could be inferred that there would be over unity systems and it would not violate the known laws of thermodynamics and physics, using the Coulomb variance and Faraday's field equations. But back to the presentation. The over unity efforts induce changes in gravity or in the space-time continuum curvature metric. The fact is that some of the proofs considered as staples of the theory of relativity, as I explained earlier, can be explained by an etheric model. Rotation may allow for equilibrium. A system should be able to generate a field warping the ether by creating an imbalance between the ether and the matter that it's interacting with. The imbalance also allows the ether membrane to stretch and bend. As a body in orbit, rotation produces drag as the body interacts with the membrane. The physical drag with the membrane creates equilibrium in the interaction between the body and ether in the form of frame dragging. The smaller the body's mass, the lower the membrane drag on that body. A system should be able to permeate or to generate a field warping the ether by creating an imbalance between the ether and the matter during an interaction. And there are three possible ways to achieve this. One, asymmetric capacitors. Two, gravity beams, and forced microwaves. Here we go to what I explained earlier in the presentation, Gabriel Kron. He was at first a self-taught engineer, and then he went to school and got his degree. He wrote the Kron equation showing, in effect, that space-time can be warped by rotating magnetic systems, mechanical systems. And Gabriel Kron had a way of understanding the process of how electrical systems interact with the medium. In his workspace, it could be manipulated by bending local space that occurs when rotating systems are coupled to each other in certain ways. As I explained before in the papers written by Gabriel Kron, the rotating system's geometry is itself an example of how you can engineer curvature in local space-time by generating a torsion effect generated by the rotating system. Rotation creates vectors of force bending the fabric of space-time, or the etheric fabric, that is normally perpendicular to the forces such as magnetism and electricity that may be more parallel, undergoing a kind of distant parallelism brought forth by extreme warping of space. With an ether as a membrane, then there is a medium in which one can effectively interact with this, and that it can be shown how space can be manipulated. The issue, and I'm going to the results here, the issue is that the space-time curvature tensor, I should say, forgive me, may provide a means of validating this issue. This form does not include the cosmological constant, which accounts for the expansion or contraction of the universe, which Einstein thought was his greatest mistake. But however, from Hubble Space Telescope observations, and now with James Webb, we're seeing that there's what they call an anti-gravity force that's causing the universe to expand further away instead of the Hubble constant, which should indicate that gravity will cause, after a certain amount of time, will cause all these bodies to intercollapse within one another. Einstein first postulated that years ago, but never thought that his postulations were correct. And it is my opinion that he thought that if it could be proven that his cosmological constant was correct, it would do away with the need for the theory of relativity, because what is causing the interaction? There is an implied force that's generating the effect. It can be hypothesized that implied force interaction is from ether. And Einstein could not grasp until the end of his life that an ether model would be the one model that would work well in his decision to do the unified field theory. But let me continue. What is required to combine is a combined approach that takes three systems, asymmetric capacitors, forced microwaves, and gravity beams, in order to generate the warp effect needed to control gravity by allowing frequencies that will allow for the slipstream effect to occur. Now, if you're wondering what the slipstream effect is, wormhole. Stargate, SG-1 and whatever. I was never really a big fan of that show, but I love the movie. But when they enter in and jump into that stargate, they're not only entering in a wormhole and traversing from one point to another. Simultaneously, they're in a slipstream effect. And it's that forced pressure that's counteracting with their equipment, with their bodies or whatever, that's generating the forward momentum that they're using to get from one point to another. What a warp field does, and let me explain in the results portion, is that you're generating null space, negative space within a confined area. That doesn't mean that you're generating a field. You're generating what I call a space within a space, interdimensional warping. And what you're doing when you warp that area and you're inside that cocoon, that space right there that you're inside of, that space stays stationary because you shifted out of what we call our dimensional space. You shifted into another parallel dimension or space. The field itself that's being generated generates the forward momentum needed to go from point A to point B by increasingly interacting with the etheric field. And by using these processes, and if you can combine all three, asymmetric capacitors, forced microwaves, and also gravity beams, but even better yet, using variants of the M drive, not the M drive itself. There are basic problems with M drive right now that even I can see. But some of the concepts are correct because what you need to do is a resonating chamber, pulsing electromagnetic waves in a combined or confined space, and then amplifying that field effect using a torsion effect. So I'm giving more away than I did in my original presentation, but I'm still not going to give away the farm. There are certain other procedures that you would need to do in order to generate the necessary effect to generate a warp drive. But those are the basic in the premises, right? Or the basics right now in the premise that you can generate a warp field. And here's the greatest part: using current technology, not having to wait 100 years to get it done. I would say that with the proper funding and all, we could have a warp drive in 3 to 5 years. I want you to think about that. 3 to 5 years. Proper funding and application of said technology would allow us to be able to generate a warp field effect using our current state of technology. Applied to that, systems generated development, we would be able to travel to at least the nearest planets that we have in our system right now in less time than what is being projected in reports. Currently using the Artemis program and even Starship. Now, I love the Starship, Elon Musk, doing a great job. But that is not the state of technology we need to get off planet so we can colonize other planets. It will not work. It's not sustainable. What we need is a sustainable technology. And what I'm talking about here is developing that sustainable technology. All we have to do is, it's all about configuring and applying the new configurations of applied technologies we currently have to generate a warp field. effect, a warp drive. But are we going to do it or are we not going to do it? I will bet you money that we could develop a warp drive in months, a working prototype. In fact, that's what I'm trying to work on right now. In fact, I've been working on it for 30 years now. If we can actually do that, we have the ability to take humanity and make us a spacefaring nation and world. We have that ability to conquer the universe if we so choose to. And let me make a very clear point to all of you. I hate being a naysayer. And I think humanity, we can finally reach the point where we can live in harmony. Bottom line, we have that ability. But, so I don't think war is going to destroy all of humanity. Not at all. But there are natural processes and even processes from outside of our planet that can destroy life as we know it on this planet. And if we don't make plans to leave the planet before these events do occur, take into effect, humanity is going to cease to exist. I wrote a paper many years ago, a white paper that I presented to the Bilderberg Group many years ago. It was a paper that was the basis of an article in the New Yorker, by the way, called Project Exodus. It was a plea to get the elite to open up these technologies that they have already developed, mind you. What I'm talking about, in that paper, kind of doing things because of the optics here. What I'm talking about in this paper right now has already been developed in classified programs under the auspices of companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing Phantom Works, so on and so forth. We have the technology to go there. But like Ben Rich from the Skunk Works would say, it would take an act of God to get this out for the use of the civilian populace. And I'm paraphrasing that. That's not the exact quote. But the point is, we have that technology. What I'm doing right now is reinventing the wheel, but hopefully reinventing it in such a way where we can get benefits for all of mankind. Okay, and Steve, could you go ahead and expand the, okay, thank you. Okay, well, this is pretty much the field equation I was talking about. And I don't think differential, I know a lot of you might know the math here, but I'm trying to get to a point where I know the science behind it, but I know a lot of you may not know what it is that I would be discussing at that point. So I'm going to go straight to the conclusion right now. To control gravity, one might want to look at the force of gravity as an interactive effect between an ether-like membrane and matter itself, not as a force on its own. Ether is becoming more accepted as a unifying force factor than even relativity once was. In the form of quantum ether-based model that allows for unification of forces, and I put that in quotes because they're effects, not forces, such as the strong and weak nuclear forces and gravity with electromagnetism. This can be achieved by using a plasma that permeates the universe. It is this very field that may be the catalyst for the very creation of matter itself. It is the interaction between the states of matter that leads to the strong and weak nuclear forces with gravity and electromagnetism. Okay, and now I've ended the presentation. And here's my contact email. If you want to contact me and let me know what you think or ask any questions, if you're not at the point where you want to ask a question tonight about what I'm talking about, it's rickp52 at proton.me. And I'm selling 2 books right now. Now, I will be selling these 2 books at the conference. If you come and buy a copy of Redemption, a Prophecy Chronicles story, I will promise you I will give you a autographed copy of it. So please come to the conference, buy the book, and help Steve Ellswick here out. Thank you again, and God bless you.
Thank you, Paul. Anyway, we'd like to invite anyone who has any questions to either do it through comment, or if you want to come on the studio there, just use the link here at StreamYard, PU9WJ5NZ5Z, and we'll get you right on in. There's a lot of things happening in the world today, which makes a lot of this information relevant. And we are being faced right now with a nuclear war possibility, unfortunately, from a variety of areas. And it puts in perspective what John Brandenburg was talking last week when he discussed the evidence that exists that a nuclear war actually occurred on Mars and caused the ecological devastation that forced the people to leave the Martians leave the planet, come to Earth. Anyway, here's a question for you, Paul. How close do you think we are to a home unit that utilizes this ether energy to power our appliances?
I think that we are closer than what you think. I've been working on a design dealing with that particular issue, and I think we could build it actually and have it up and running. It'd be a small unit, but produce enough megajoules of power. We're talking a very small unit, produce enough megajoules of power to power a whole small town for at the very least 1 year. Not connected to the power grid. Because let me explain also to answer that question. With the frame or with the dragging that the rotational or the rotating field generates, it does generate with that drag interaction with the ether an electrical pulse that then can be converted into working energy. But that I'm not going to go into too much more detail about because it's proprietary, but pretty much it's basic, easy peasy, and it can be done with the proper funding in short order.
I believe like a lot of our power needs on this nation could be met with a thing called helium-3, and it's very plentiful on the moon. And again, Mr. Brandenburg talked about it last week, a little bit about it. But for those of you who don't understand what helium-3 is, it's like a microwave in reverse. You take the helium-3, you put it in the container, you ignite it using at the time they discovered it, a super hot point. Then all of a sudden it sets off the reaction. Reaction just is like a electromagnetic explosion there. We have all these radio waves being emitted from the helium-3, and there is no radiation from it to speak of, except for the electromagnetic that you can pick up, like a microwave in reverse, and take and put this onto the power grid. That's one of the things that they're looking at. I think that as we learn to manipulate the ether and that, and get this anti-gravity and this to work. Anti-gravity implies motion. Anytime you have motion, you have energy and you have power. And that is what we're all looking for. So, do you have any aspects of maybe possible use of some of the stuff you're talking about?
Okay, you're talking to me, correct?
Yeah, as far as like a
Well,
energy source.
well, number one, developing the technology, you can use it to generate electricity for a small town. And actually, I believe it can be done indefinitely. The developing of the small device would actually take no more than, I would say, 9 months to a year, maybe 2 years to develop it and do the testing on it. And it deals mainly with the generation of the vacuum fluctuations within the etheric field and how you can uniformly, using a torus rotating, you can uniformly sequence those fluctuations into a steady stream or steady pulse of energy that then can be used and guided into the system, generating electricity. And that should be indefinite without the need of, and I understand helium-3, and it's abundant not only on the moon, but also in other bodies of the solar system. Other bodies of the solar system here. Pardon me, sorry about that. Let me turn this phone down. Can we do this here? Okay, right there. Helium-3 comes from the sun, from solar radiation coming from the sun itself. It's deposited on the moon and also on other bodies in the solar system as well. However, what I'm talking about is not helium-3. It's generating a field interaction. Hold one moment. Can I get this right quickly? Hey Tom, I gotta call you back. Okay, I'm doing an interview. Thank you. Bye. We're generating a field effect. The field is going to be there. It permeates everything anyway. It's being able to tune into the energy frequencies being generated that then can be sequenced and allowed to be used and converted into working electricity. And before we go any further, I wanted to tell Maria Gonzalez, thank you so much for the question. I appreciate that. Hopefully you can take something from this interview today or from this presentation and be able to go with it. And I sure hope so for all of your sake. But here's the other thing that you can apply the technology to. Warp drive. I know that you have people like Dr. White, who's doing variations on the LQBA effect. But what if I were to tell you that using an etheric model and not a relativistic model, that we could have and use the same process by creating a toroidal rotational field, we could generate a warp drive using the same process as I explained to help generate electricity. It's a different configuration, mind you. Okay? However, the process is the same. What I'm saying is that we can have warp drive in a matter of maybe, at the very least, 5 years. Why we're not doing it now is only, and I mean outside the classified realms. I mean, there are certain technologies and certain materials that are needed to be used in this process that we cannot get direct access to, one of them being metamaterials. And the only way you can get those metamaterials is to be a government contractor working on a classified project. But I want everyone to think about this, and I didn't mention this earlier in the presentation. A friend of mine, the former scientist, now deceased, his name's Dr. William Billy Rose. He was a theoretical physicist who worked out at Area 51. Now, in spite of what Jeremy Rice has said about what he has researched on S4, number one, don't always believe the symbols and monikers they put on Google Maps and on Google Earth, because they have admitted, Google has admitted, that they do put erroneous references in their maps under orders from the Department of Defense. Either black them out or state that one place is an actual designation when it's not. But Billy Rose was an optical physicist and a plasma physicist who worked out at Area 51. He also had a doctorate in physics. He had a master's degree in psychology. He taught at San Antonio College in San Antonio, Texas, a course in parapsychology, of all things, where he introduced some of the work he did in the classified realms within the structure of his coursework. I met him there, and we talked a lot about warp physics and how to build a warp drive. This was back in 1999, 2000 through 2005. And I kept saying we could build a warp drive now. Why are they saying that it'll take 100 years? And I knew Billy's work in the classified realm. Billy needed to focus on one thing when it came to generating anti-gravity or warp drive. He said, think optics. It didn't make much sense to me back then. I kept thinking optics. We're talking about propagation of light through a medium. Optical physics does not only work with light, but contraction and refraction of electromagnetic fields is still considered a form of optical manipulation. When you're dealing with metamaterials, they found that they could develop a cloak using metamaterials. And that is bending light around an object so that way you can't see the object because it's focusing on the sky, projecting the image around on the other side, cloaking the object from making it visibly invisible. Good way of putting it. But if you apply that to other parts of physics when it deals with the electromagnetic spectrum, using those materials along with rotation can generate a cohesive field that can affect generalized or localized space within an area. And Steve, I hope you understand where I'm going with this.
Possibly.
Yes. We have the materials already. My father, let me explain to you guys. My father was a Roswell UFO, or is a Roswell UFO witness. He's still alive, thank God. He picked up the material. He had it in his possession for a while. Everything he told me about the material indicated that it generated an optical medium. It was translucent, even though they claimed it looked like aluminum foil. He claimed that he could see through it. And it had a kind of a purplish, opaque color. You could still see through it, but it had the consistency of tinfoil, is what he told me. That led me on a path of research dealing with that issue. Was it that that material had optical I can't think of the word right now, just had it in my head, Steve. Went on a brain fart moment, but did it generate an optical effect which allowed for the warping of the field around it? Now, I want you to think about that. There is a rotational field within the system itself because it does rotate. But what if you could use metamaterials to not only expand, but cohese the field to where it's unified and uniformed? You could do that, and if you have enough energy that you're drawing from either from the vacuum itself or energy potential you're generating from an electrical system on board, whether it be nuclear or otherwise. That is what you would do to generate a warp field. And that would be the proper configuration for it, because the whole craft generates the pulse resonance effect. Okay, go ahead, Steve. Sorry about that.
Well, yeah, I think what you're seeing here is a transition of physics, from the Newton mechanical type of physics is transitioning into in a big way to quantum physics, and that's why the light's so important in that. It's more of a quantum effect, and I think that's where we're all headed towards eventually, And I want to make a comment here, like on Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower and everything. At first, well, he thought he needed to put power into the ionosphere and that to actually be able to pull it back out. But later on, towards the end of his life, when he's, after he's talking about drawing the cosmic energy out and everything, he says he realized that he didn't have to add anything. The energy is there all along, And I think, that the tower was just a way of working the energy to be extracted, instead of just letting it stay there. And someday I'll be on here. I think I already did. Talk about Tesla's car, and we have achieved the same effect of actually extracting energy from we don't know where, and it worked for like 3 weeks, and it stopped working. The device, and we've never been able to get around the 3-week effect yet. But again, like I say, everything's going into a quantum physics now. It's going into a quantum universe. Is where we're headed. Our understanding of it. So, I don't know. Do you have anything else to say, or should we just call it a night?
Well, I just say thank you, Steve, for allowing me the opportunity to be on your show. I do appreciate it. 2, if any of you want to buy my book and you don't come to the conference this year, go to Amazon.com, buy Redemption. You can buy either the hard copy or the paperback. One's for $33 and the other one's for $55. You'll help support what I'm doing. And number 2, if you buy the book, you have my email, all of you. Send me a notice that you bought the book, and when you receive it, take a picture, so that way I can have a record of the the purchase. So that way I can affect changes within the within Amazon to make sure that they credit me for the royalties being for the sale itself. So if you would do that, I would love you and I would appreciate you. And I love you, Steve, and I love what you're doing, my friend.
And I'll
God
just
bless.
like to remind people, tonight, if you will call me after the show, we're giving a 30% discount on a conference registration. You also need to call the hotel immediately tonight because their the reservations for the $82 price is supposed to end tonight. I may be able to get some extended. I have some extra rooms there. I may be able to get converted. So if you have a problem, you can't get that rate, give me a call. You know, but I can't emphasize enough. Come on down. Come to the conference. Don't wait till next year. There may not be a next year. I may not be here. The plant may not be here. So come on down and check out the conference and bring a friend. Bring a couple friends. If you have teenagers, bring them. Teens are free. It's a good way to get them out of their doldrums and get them into something that may well change the course of their life. You know, so I encourage you to come to the conference. Uh, you won't regret it. The only things that I found that people um, regret are the things they didn't do in life. You know, and yeah, money is a major concern for some people, and myself included. I live on an extremely tight budget. Uh, literally extremely tight. But yet I'm able to put these things together every year, and I encourage you to come and do it. And then also, if you get a chance, become a member on the Tesla Tech channel. All that helps us. Everything we get goes right back into doing these events and everything. And like I say, don't keep us the best kept secret in science. Let your friends know about it that we do exist. And thank you very much. And y'all have a great evening.